So, as a huge fan of the Shinobi games of old, when the demo for the new Shinobi game, Art of Vengeance, got released a while back, I decided to release a video with my thoughts on it, along with a little retrospective look back at some of my favourite games in the series that I'd played as a kid. In short, I loved it. The release date of the game just happened to fall around the same time I had a holiday out of the country planned, so I got a few days playing on my PS4 before I went away, and then came back to it once I was back in the country. In that time, my fellow Sega-loving friends, the Sega Guys, Retro Martin and Slopes Game Room, all released their own reviews, extolling the virtues of the game, and the game itself had been critically well received elsewhere, with multi-format Metacritic scores in the mid to high 80s and a rating of 9 out of 10 on Steam. So, although I'd covered the demo and very much enjoyed it, I didn't feel there was much I could add to the discourse on the game that hadn't already been said. But something I've become aware of recently is that there seems to be a small but vocal minority of people who actively dislike it and seem to be trying to engineer some kind of narrative that it's not a good game. Now, normally this kind of thing wouldn't bother me. There's a lot of popular games that are beloved by other people that I don't like, for example, Shenmue. But the issue here though with Art of Vengeance is that the basis on which a lot of these arguments being made for the game not being very good, especially when compared to the older Shinobi games, just seems like absolute bollocks to me. So much so, I felt compelled to put this video together as a response. So, as I discussed in the demo video review, one of the biggest changes to the new Shinobi are a greater emphasis on melee combat and combos. Enemies now have health meters that need depleting, unlike the enemies that would normally die with one hit from one of your shurikens or kunai throwing knives. Joe Musashi did have melee attacks in the old games, a single standing or crouching punch or kick, but the emphasis of the gameplay was usually on ranged attacks. Another big change is the expansion of the levels into a more Metroidvania style, with a little bit more of an emphasis on exploration and some simple puzzle solving than the Shinobi games of old, which tended to have a more linear left to right progression and could normally be completed in a few minutes. It's not a true Metroidvania style, where all of the levels combine into one single overarching world. What it means is that there are secret areas in the levels that, in the early stages of the game, you can't immediately access until you unlock certain abilities as you play through. These usually lead to things that power up your character, like additional ninpo magics, extra health slots, or increasing your capacity to hold more kunai throwing knives. Or they might lead you to an Oboro relic, which you'll need to collect to unlock access to all the items in the shop, or one of the 3 optional E&E Corp Elite Squadron fights you can do, or one of the super challenging Anko Rift levels, which you can optionally complete to unlock a new katana in the game. As you progress through Art of Vengeance, these secret areas get increasingly harder and harder to traverse, with the difficulty ramping right up in some of the later ones. Now, one of the first criticisms I've seen levelled at the game is that it's too easy compared to the old Shinobi games, and that there's a lack of variety in the enemy types, and that none of them are particularly challenging to beat. In fact, people have straight up accused the CPU opponents of being pretty brainless. Now, as I mentioned, I'm a huge fan of the old school Shinobi games. I'm a 49-year-old bloke who grew up with the Sega Master System and Mega Drive, and Revenge of Shinobi was the second ever Mega Drive game I got back in the early 90s. I completed it multiple times back then, and do you know what? The variety of enemies in Art of Vengeance is pretty indicative of how it was back in the day in the old Shinobi games. In Revenge of Shinobi, you'd usually just get a few different palette swap ninjas, some soldier types, samurai, dogs, secret assassin ladies disguised as nuns, and some flamethrowing Rambo lookalikes. The majority of these, with the exception of the Rambos and the samurais, could usually be killed with one shuriken or kunai. You would encounter these same types of enemies throughout all the stages. And with regards to the CPUs being brainless in Art of Vengeance, the soldiers and ninjas in the old games would usually just stand in one place shooting at you. They didn't chase after you or anything like that. The Rambos would slowly progress towards you, but could usually be taken out with a few kunai, and the same for the assassin nuns, So, if anything, Art of Vengeance is actually replicating the behaviour of the old games pretty faithfully there. So, how exactly is it offering less challenge in this case? Another criticism I've seen levelled at the game is that there are areas where you can just straight up ignore the enemies, jump over them, and move on to the next section of the level. But there were sections of the old games where you could have done this too, if for some bizarre reason you didn't want to play it properly. There's also an argument going around that the game is too easy and that it caters to casual players too much. To which my response is, what the actual fuck? The level of challenge in some of the Anko rifts, and in particular the secret bunker in the final stage, are incredibly high. Like genuinely old school, insanely difficult hard. Much harder in fact than anything I ever encountered in Revenge of Shinobi. The argument for Art of Vengeance being an inferior product to the old Shinobi games seems to be based on this weird narrative that it's not Nintendo hard, with the sort of tear your hair out in frustration difficulty of something like Battletoads or Ghosts 'n Goblins on the NES. Now, while something like the original arcade Shinobi, and to a certain degree Shadow Dancer on the Mega Drive, where an enemy could kill you in one single hit, would come under this category, this was not the case with Revenge of Shinobi, or Shinobi 3, or Shinobi on the Sega Master System, where you had a life bar which gradually normally got bigger as you progressed through the game. These games were challenging but fair. Each time you played, you'd normally progress a little bit further each time. When you died, it rarely felt like it was because of some unfair mechanic, or because the CPU's a cheating bastard. It was because you made a mistake, which you then learnt from, and then tried not to repeat on your next playthrough. And this is how I progressed through Art of Vengeance. Unlike the old Shinobi games, where you could literally complete the entire level in a few minutes in some cases, Art of Vengeance has got huge labyrinthine levels that can take between 30 to 40 minutes to get through. So, of course they're going to get well served with save points. Is this a concession to easy modern casual gaming? All I know is, if it saves me backtracking on myself for 40 minutes if I die stupidly, I'm all for it. This whole business of people who identify themselves as hardcore gamers nowadays and try to act like they're some elite upper echelon of society who look down their noses at what they refer to as the filthy casuals, i.e. people that just want to play games to have a bit of fun, is just utterly mystifying to me. Back when I was a kid in the 80s, there wasn't some weird divide of hardcore and casual gamers, they were just, people who liked playing games. I was used to old game difficulty back then. As well as the Shinobis, I completed stuff on the Mega Drive like eSWAT, Rocket Knight Adventures, Wonder Boy and Monster World, Strider, as well as stuff on the GBA when I was a bit older, like Super Mario World, Super Mario Bros. 2, Yoshi's Island, Metroid Fusion, Metroid Zero Mission, one of the GBA Castlevanias, I can't remember which one now, and even the OG Super Mario Bros. So I'm no stranger to old difficult platform games. If I had to use this taxonomy of modern gamer speak, then I would probably class myself as a casual gamer now. I don't play games all that often generally, and when I do, I'm not adverse to a little bit of hand holding through the really difficult sections. But don't mistake that for thinking I can't roll up my sleeves and get stuck into a really difficult game nowadays. A few years back, I played all the way to the end and completed Cuphead, which did admittedly strain every single one of my nerves to breaking point. And the point I'm labouring away at here is that I know what I'm talking about when I say that there were sections in Art of Vengeance that were way harder than anything I ever encountered in some of those old games I talked about completing a short while ago. I've seen some people argue that if you've got to seek out the difficulty, it somehow invalidates its inclusion in the game. I saw a YouTube video where one guy said they didn't bother accessing the secret areas because they weren't going to power up your character any further. They played through the game avoiding all the combat where possible to just brute force their way to the end, and then kept complaining they were bored. This also baffles me. Like, what the fuck did you expect if you're not going to play the game properly? It's like cutting off your nose to spite your own face. Why would you not want to explore everything the game's got to offer if you spent money on it and you want to get the most out of it? It'd be like, I don't know, getting a Gran Turismo game and only restricting yourself to one car and a couple of racetracks, instead of experiencing the full gamut of what the game has to offer. Completing some of these areas isn't necessarily about the reward you get at the end of it, in terms of a relic or a new Nimpo magic you can use. I feel it's about the satisfaction of knowing you just beat a really difficult area. And this is coming from someone who's a self-described filthy casual. And these areas are difficult. Completing the secret bunker and some of the Anko rifts and the secret areas in the kaiju and the submarine base was every bit as nerve-shredding as some of the bosses in Cuphead, or trying to complete the very last level in Super Mario Bros. And moving into some explicit spoilery territory here, skip forward to the timecode I'm about to show on the screen to avoid it. If you're going to be going into the game fresh and don't want any surprises revealed, I'll just give you half a second or two to do this. Still here? Okay, great. There's even a secret boss, the Shadow Master, a throwback to the final boss of Shinobi 3, who's harder to beat than all the other bosses in the game put together. Whether you agree Art of Vengeance is an evolution of the old games or not is up to you, but there's nothing wrong here with how it plays at all as far as I'm concerned. And I haven't even touched on stuff like the incredible hand-drawn graphics and the excellent soundtrack. In fact, just on the subject of the soundtrack, in my review of the demo, I was a little on the fence about it, but now having experienced it in the full game, I'm definitely on board with what T. Lopes, the composer, has done. I especially like the Neo City soundtrack, which sounds like it would have fit in very well with his previous work on Streets of Rage 4. And I do love the little nods to the Shinobi games of old here, like the hostages you rescue in Neo City, looking just like the hostages from the original arcade Shinobi. I also like the return of Mandra, one of the most iconic bosses from the first game, and things like the brains in jars you have to take down, that also featured in Shinobi 3. So anyway, that's my 2 cents on the subject. Liking or disliking a game, finding it too easy or too hard, is an entirely subjective matter. So if you're someone who doesn't like the game, that's fair enough. Your opinion is valid. But I just felt I needed to address some of the criticisms that some people have been levelling at the game, especially the narrative of it being too easy, or the enemies not being challenging enough when compared to the old Shinobi games. Because, as I've hopefully been able to put a compelling argument across for, I think this is just blatantly not true. Personally, I loved it, even though there were some secret parts of it that were so difficult my controller almost got thrown across the room a few times. And as I stated at the start of the video, so did a lot of my Sega loving contemporaries who are all old school gamers. And you know, we can't all be wrong, can we? So if you are someone who's been on the fence with regards to making a purchase, but had been put off by the small minority of these vocal haters, then hopefully I've helped redress that balance a little bit. Anywho, that's all from me. If you didn't like the game, I'm sure you'll be quick enough to let me know in the comments, but you know, just keep the tone civil, eh? And if, like me, you did enjoy it and thought it was a worthy addition to the Shinobi franchise, then please do let me know in the comments about that too. Anyway, take care everyone, I will catch you again for another video sometime soon. Ta-ra!